afternoon from Omaha, Nebraska. This is Dr. K, and we're going to follow up the last video on track profiles because it may have been a little bit confusing about, well, okay, we can keep all this stuff on Excel spreadsheets, but how do we use it? And so this video is dedicated to the whole concept of what do we do once we have the track profile. Let's look at some examples and we can talk about how to use it. To me, one of the great ways to use track profiles is to get an idea of what type of numbers you should see depending on the type of horse it is. Is it a pure front runner? Is it a horse that can be a front runner or be a presser? Is it just a presser? Could be a presser or a deep closer or just a deep closer. But what this chart talks about is it takes all the winning times of the horses. And when I talk about times, I'm talking about using my system of developing a par number for both the middle fraction and the come home fraction. And I've typed those in. I've got the running style right next to the numbers of E, EP, P, PS, and S. And then I've got the net number. And what the net number is designed to basically say is, okay, what type of situation are we in depending on what your running style is. And sometimes this can be a little bit misleading, but I'm going to show you what I mean. In this situation, we don't have a whole lot of E's and EPs. We've only got about 6 in this. This is from Churchill Downs in 2023, which is what the track profile was from the previous video. But what it shows is that the horses that are on the lead typically run about an even number, or sometimes they get lucky and they have a plus number, which is what you normally would associate with a PS or an S. Somebody who's coming from a ways ought to have a higher number in the come home fraction, which would generate the plus number. But if you looked at the class, and I didn't put this into this particular profile video, but the class of the horses that ran a +7, +8 were actually all maidens. And so what a lot of times happens is horses and maidens can get away with the easier middle fraction, like a 101, 102, and then they use a lot of energy at the end. So this is not normally determinative of the way E's and EPs typically operate, especially on the E's. But on the EPs that are basically about flat to about a 0, or the P's, which are were a -1, much larger sample size for the P's. You've got a couple outliers like a -10 and stuff like that, but it gives you a pretty good idea that at least at Churchill during the 2023 season at this distance, and I can't remember what the distance was, I think this is probably at the mile, you had to run pretty flat. You couldn't be real far back, so you couldn't just close down the stretch like you normally would see. They hadn't had much rain at Churchill in 2023, and so that's what you would sort of expect in this type of situation is pressers had to run fast all the way through. If you were an early speed like an EP type of horse, you better run pretty flat too. But then the closers, if you look at it, I need to pull this back. The few PSs and S's that did win, I mean, there's only one S, so that's obviously not a good sample size. But among the PSs, of which there were several, you had to be a +9 to win. And that's a normal situation for most tracks for horses that are way back. You're not gonna, or +5, I guess is not +9. That's a normal situation. If you're about 5 lengths back, or maybe even a little more, you better close at least 5 lengths if you think you're going to win the race, because as you can see, the E's and EPs are running close to zeros. So if you're trying to run a +5 and you run against horses that are running about a 0, you better be a +5 if you're about 5 lengths back. And at Churchill during this time period, you had to be that. And again, they had not had a whole lot of rain during this time period, and that's another topic we're going to talk about right now. This next chart that we're going to look at is a great example of where Churchill Downs, when they didn't get any rain for about 2 weeks, these are all of the route races. And as you can see that they're sorted by whether they're an E, an EP, a P, or a PS. They had no deep closers win in this 2-week time period. They didn't have any rain in that time period, as I noted. When a track gets that hard and that fast. It plays so much like a dirt course. And that's really important. And you can sort of see that in the numbers, uh, in the sense that you've got minus numbers for almost all of these horses. I mean, there's about 20 races listed, and probably about 3/4 of them you're going to see a minus number. And as you expect, probably with early speed horses, the E's and EPs, they're -4 on average, -3. There's only one EP that was that. And then even for the pressers, they were only a +1, and then the PSs, of which there were a few, were only +2, which tells you that they had front runners that died during those races. But what's really important is when the track gets really hard, really fast. Saratoga had that happen this summer. Kentucky Downs here in the summer or the fall meet of 2025 probably they hadn't had any rain for about a week before the meet even started. Then during about the 10 days of the meet, they didn't get any rain either. They set all sorts of track records, and I know that some of the guys at Equibase and on Twitter and things like that talked about how the timing was off and went back and fixed it. But even after they fixed it, they still figured out they had a whole bunch of new track records. And anytime you don't get any rain for a couple of weeks and you bring in really good horses, as Kentucky Downs always has, you're going to see that type of situation. But this is the type of situation that you're going to see, again, when it's a hard-baked course. Too many times people look at the nomenclature and they see the word firm. Well, firm to a lot of people just means, well, you can be a presser, you can be on the lead, you can be a closer, and you can get there. But when it's hard-baked, when they haven't had the rain, which is why on your profile you need to keep track of rain. When they haven't had any rain of more than, say, a 1/4 of an inch, and some tracks, the first time they get like 1/2 inch, it just all runs off and doesn't do much good anyway. But the main point is when they get really hard-baked like this, you better be close to the front. You're not going to have too many people that are closing. You've only got 3 S's out of about 20 races here. And I remember most of the races where the PSs won, and you can see that the numbers were pretty superior. 101, 104, those are graded stakes type of numbers. And then the one that was the 95 to 98 there, which is a -3, tells you how much the front speed died. And that's predictable too, and we're going to talk about that in a later topic too. But this just shows you that when you don't get rain and you get that hard-baked surface, this is what happens. It looks like you're going to have horses that are dying, but on a hard-baked surface, they don't die. And so you've got those type of issues when you're trying to put together that 80%, and you see not only what the numbers are and how far back they are, but on a typical track, you're always going to be looking at these horses like at the top of the chart, 101, 96, 102, 100, 99, 97 for these 3 front runners. If you had a normal track with a normal amount of rainfall, those horses couldn't win. The front runners that typically win when it's a normal racetrack are not negative numbers. They're flat, maybe they're a +1, maybe they're the only early speed in the race and they can get away with a -1, but that doesn't happen very much. Almost always they're flat to +1, maybe you get a +2 type of thing on a normal track. But when it gets hard-baked like this, these type of negative numbers happen all the time, and you have to be aware of it, but you can benefit from it because you can look at a horse, and particularly a lot of long shots that are -2, -3, -4. The average player is thinking to themselves, well, they're just going to go out and they're going to die. Well, they don't die, and at 20 to 1, you got a nice hit. So let's talk about some of the other track profile issues. This is one of the truly great charts you're going to see in any of my videos. And the reason why this is good is this is a bit of a derivative off of what we looked at last. In the last video, we showed all the mile races at Kentucky Downs in 2025. What this does is it takes all of the various data that we had in the generation of the numbers and it lays it out in a way that really helps you with a hard-baked track. And what I really want to point you to is my numbers generate the first 2 columns. The MF rating, I could say a different thing for an MF, but I won't. But that's the middle fraction rating next to the final fraction rating. And that's what all the winners at a mile at Kentucky Downs in this current meet that just got over a few weeks ago in 2025, those are all the numbers at a mile. But when you've got a hard baked track like you do, you also need to go back and add in the raw numbers. Now, if you go to horsestreet.com, Dave Schwartz's great par numbers. Dave is absolutely the best guy out there. I know some of you use other ones, but you need to get Dave's stuff because it's got the best and the most reliable numbers out there for par numbers. And so what Dave's numbers are columns F and G. And columns F and G, again, are nothing more than they've calculated what Dave's system would calculate. And so it's really interesting that when it's hard baked, of course, it's harder for horses to generate as much closing energy. But on Dave's system of par numbers, the numbers really translate pretty well. And you can see going down the list that you see a lot of fairly even numbers. But when you add all of these for a given race together, divide by 4, you can get a really accurate number for each horse that won a race at Kentucky Downs. As you know from the previous profile, we also have class ratings in there too, so that we know that the first rating may have been a maiden special weight, the second one may be a class 1, but we keep track of the class 2 because we're going to generate another chart off of this. But what this is really good at doing is it lays out in one spot exactly what my numbers generate from the middle fraction and the final fraction, but then right next to it are Dave Schwartz's parstreet.com's par numbers, and you throw them all together and you come up with one great number. So then you've got a really good number, such as from the 115, 108, 114, etc. And then when you compare that to the class, you can come up with a great class system. And that's the next thing that we're going to look at here.